This is our last meeting for the semester of the Minerva Center for the Rule of Law under Extreme Conditions. I hope everybody will have a fruitful and productive break. We are happy to host today Dr. Saar Alon Barkat, who is here at the University of Haifa at the School of Political Science, Department of Public Administration and Policy. His academic research focuses on citizen-government relations, and this is a topic related to his presentation today. The floor is yours, about 40 minutes, and then we'll have a Q&A.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here, and thank you for the invitation. As Yali reminded me, I also have background in law. So my bachelor is in law, and I always enjoy conversation between political scientists and legal scholar. I always find it very, very fruitful. That's my experience, and I hope that this would not be any different.
Not all of us are legal scholars.
And I can see also Nadir from the crowd, so hi Nadir. Excellent. Okay, so this is a collaborative project. With us via Zoom is Michal Gilboa, who is a PhD student. She is also a co-author of this collaboration project. Michal, she couldn't, sadly, she could not have been here. And our third partner, Jürgen Willems, is a scholar from University of Vienna. And the aim, so it's going to be a cross-country study. And the aim is to collect data both in Israel and in Austria, and maybe in other EU countries, which is why Jürgen is also a partner. But I should say, from the beginning, that what I'm going to present is a kind of work in progress. So I'm going to share with you the concept, the idea, and some data that we have collected in Israel. So we are actually conducting the real study in Israel as we speak right now. We started the day before yesterday, and it's going to be for, I think, for the following month, we're going to collect data. And we hope to do the Austrian study later this year. So what we're going to show you is some results from pilot studies which we have conducted. Everything is very tentative, but we welcome any feedback on the project. So as the title suggests, it's a project on the link between populist attitudes, populism, and public sector stereotypes. So in terms of the discipline, the study is kind of connecting political science and public administration. And the main idea that we're going to talk, or the question we're asking is, could it be the case that populism changes the stereotypes people have about public sector employees, about civil servants, about bureaucrats? That's the main question that we're going to talk about, that I'm going to talk about. Okay, so to kind of put the setting, so the starting point, the perspective that we're adopting is a governance perspective that focuses on citizen-government relations, which I think also legal scholars would also share this kind of perspective that says that citizens' perceptions, what citizens feel and think matters. It matters because these perceptions, these experiences are consequential for policy compliance, for how people respond to policy, how they actually behave, to what extent do they cooperate with authorities, or sometimes the word co-production is used, I think, also in legal research, regulation compliance. Also, the acceptance and legitimacy of rules. It also matters because it shapes citizens' attraction to work in the civil service. That's also important. And lastly, our paradigm also views citizens as important account holders. So citizens are not only rule followers, they are also account holders in our system, and we want them to be effective account holders. So for all these reasons, what citizens believe, what they perceive, how they perceive the perceptions about public administration, about government matters. And within this literature, there's also a discussion about stereotypes. That some of these perceptions are not only shaped by, rational factors about actual policy. They are also shaped by stereotypes, images people have about bureaucracy, about bureaucrats. And so there's a growing literature in public administration that is basically, it's inspired by psychology literature about social stereotypes. And this literature says that people also have stereotypes about bureaucrats. They also have stereotypes about civil servants. So you can see a definition by one of the key works. What are stereotypes? They are beliefs about characteristics, attributes, and behaviors of people working in the public sector. And what's important to consider when we talk about stereotypes is that stereotypes act, this is what social psychology literature tells us, they act as cognitive shortcuts, so something very, very fast that is basically unconscious. It's not something that we are aware of. It's an unaware, latent mechanism, and it shapes our expectations. So even before we interact with the government, we have some kind of expectation that is based partly on stereotypes. And these stereotypes also bias. They shape, they bias how we evaluate what government does and the behavior that they have. So I'm not trying to say the stereotypes are the whole thing, that they are detrimental, that everything we do is only a part of stereotypes, but stereotypes also play a role in shaping how we view government. Also, we kind of assume that stereotypes are something stable. That's something that is formulated sometimes even in early stages of life, and they're relatively stable and hard to correct or hard to change. And lastly, where do these stereotypes come from? So stereotypes, basically, they are social constructs. They are a cultural thing. They are, and as such, this is something that we learn from the culture we live in, and they are reinforced by this culture. So when we talk about public sector stereotypes, what do we talk about? So the conventional, kind of traditional assumption is that the stereotype of public sector is something like typically as inefficient, rigid, incompetent, lazy. And this is kind of, when you go to public administration books, this is kind of the common wisdom assumption, and which is well known. And where does it come from? So we think that it is reinforced by, or it's shaped and reinforced by neoliberal. So it really reflects neoliberal ideas, neoliberal ideology. And then new public management reforms, they tell the same story. We need to reform the government because the government is not performing very well, because civil servants, they need incentives because otherwise they will not work. It's really reflected in kind of Reagan-style narratives. So if you go to Donald Reagan's speeches, you can see how he's playing with these ideas. And it's also reinforced by pop culture images, the things that we see. So here's an example from a Disney character of the sloth from Zootropolis, and from the left is Zootropolis. We can't hear you. Say it again.
I'm asking, is this Zootropolis 1 or 2? So just for you to know that it's probably true, the same character, but he's the fast driver. So
Nadeem, your connection is not good enough.
I translate what Nadeem says.
I'm sorry.
I translate what Nadeem says. You started from the beginning, but we have Kafka. Stereotyping bureaucracy, and so it's not a new phenomenon. The new neoliberals.
Right. I mean, nothing is like entirely new, right? Everything comes from has roots. So over the past decade or so, there's a growing research in public administration, empirical research on stereotypes, and the findings of this research is actually it's quite interesting. So they show that the stereotypes are a bit more nuanced than this. So these studies, they do find these kind of negative stereotypes, but they also find positive aspects. So it's more nuanced. It's more than one dimension. So it's multidimensional. You can see here examples from one of the more comprehensive studies conducted by Neo et al. It's a team from several countries, and they've done a comparative study in 4 different countries. So I gave you here examples from 2 different countries. They use a method where they show people a list of traits, 36 traits, I think, and then they ask them, which of these traits do you think are more typical for bureaucrats? And you can see here the results from the Netherlands and the US. So, and these are like the most frequently mentioned traits. And you can clearly see here these classical stereotypes of lazy, inflexible, go home on time. But you can also see other positive stereotypes of caring, responsible, serving, hopeful. And one helpful way to put this thing together is through a model from psychology. That is a very, very common model for stereotypes called the stereotype content model, or SCM, which divides stereotypes to 2 key aspects: warmth and competence. Competence meaning your ability and your assertiveness, and warmth is your morality or sociability. Okay, and then you can be either high or low on both aspects. So in these terms, you can characterize the stereotype as low competence, high warmth. Okay, so that is kind of the agreement, or what comes out of the research in public administration
in both countries.
In both countries, and also in
another
kind of it's not like, I don't want to put it too simplistic and say, but it's more nuanced. You can see some variation, but overall, I think this is what you can characterize these stereotypes. And I'm showing you here data from previous study by me and Michal. This is data we collected in 2023 in Israel. We use a slightly different approach. Rather than showing them a list of traits, we ask them spontaneously, what are the traits, the characteristics that come to your mind when we ask you about civil servants? And then they openly say whatever they have in mind, which is, there are some advantages to this method. It's called SSCM, Spontaneous Stereotypes Content Model. And you can see here more or less the same things, maybe a bit more negative in Israel, but kind of the same idea. With this system, we also take the words and then we put them in these, we code them to categories, and we also code them to the valence, the direction from positive to negative. We actually ask them to code it, but it's the same thing, never mind. And you can see here that similarly to the other countries, to the other studies, we also see here that the competence dimension is more negative and the warmth is a bit more positive. And specifically on morality, you can see that Israeli citizens tend to rate public bureaucrats a bit more positively.
Sorry, did you ask them generally about public servants, or specifically, let's say, the tax authority, the DMV,
Yeah, it's a great question. We actually asked them about all sorts of different categories, but we also asked them about a general category of civil servants, and what we show you here is about the general category. There are similarities and differences between them. and there's a good question of whether you need to be more nuanced or not. For here, we're going to only talk about the general category. And there's a logic to that, because the idea about stereotypes is that it is something general that we have in mind and that we use as a heuristic shortcut. So if there is such a thing as a stereotype of civil servant, which is what the literature tells us, it should be something that we use and activate every time we see a bureaucrat, whether it is a welfare bureaucrat or a bureaucrat in another agency or whatever. There should be some kind of general category that we use and implement. But I mean, it's yeah, I can see the skepticism about it.
No, but my problem is I know you're trying to isolate the variable, right? But then again, you have personal experience.
Yeah.
So, for example, the tax, I've had great interactions with the tax authority. So, so because it is so surprising, because I have this stereotype, but my experience contradicts the stereotype, so it becomes kind of salient. So it really kind of sticks and might change the stereotype.
Yeah, but I mean, if you follow what psychology literature tells us, it would tell us that even if you confront with something that is different than the stereotype, then you would experience a kind of cognitive dissonance. Mm-hmm. Eventually, either you would, like the stereotype would bias the way you experience, or you would say, okay, this is an isolated case, but then the day after you would return back to the stereotype. Okay.
So sorry, just to follow up on this and to wrap my head around it. So if someone does not perceive a doctor in a public hospital as a bureaucrat, so it doesn't matter what's your category for the stereotype.
Or social worker.
Yeah, I think
social worker.
I think it's a good intuition. So the more you think of a person as a bureaucrat, the more you would use the stereotype to evaluate. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what's the Hebrew word you used?
So here we use עובדים בשירות, public service employee, עובדים בשירות הציבורי, and we deliberately use a neutral category. In the data I'm going to show you, we played around with it a bit, and we used different labels. We also used bureaucrats and clerks, Kidim. Mm-hmm. And you can see some differences, but
Kidim has a very
pejorative. It's negative. It's
the political discourse right now.
It's a negative label,
It's not necessarily negative.
Sorry?
Not necessarily.
No, in the current political.
You will see it's a bit more negative, but but the patterns are okay. We think the patterns may be consistent, even though it's more negative. Okay. So here we come to the main question of these are the stereotypes we used to think about, but then we're experiencing this wave of populism now, which has a different narrative. Does it change the stereotypes people have about public sector employees, about bureaucrats?
So you say that Thatcher or Reagan weren't populist? Maybe in 2004.
Yeah, it's always challenging to say to classify people, and some would argue that Reagan and Thatcher are not populists in the same manner that we're talking now, but it's something that we can debate. But there's a wide agreement among political scientists that we are experiencing now a wave of growing populism in economically developed countries in the EU. So you can see here an institute that is categorizing the share of votes, and there's a growing more and more voting for populist parties.
Which color is it?
The light blue is far right populists, and the light red are far left populists. So both in EU, this is in the EU, both far right and far left parties are becoming more and more successful electorally. And we are now in a position where in the key three biggest EU countries, the populist party leads the polls in the UK, in Germany, and in France. It's also the situation in Austria, which is one of the cases. So this is the area where we live. And why would we expect populism to matter? Oh, just 2 words about populism. We are adopting what is called in political science an ideational approach to populism, meaning, okay, I'm looking at
the thing.
Yeah. So this is an approach that views populism not only as a rhetoric style, but also as an ideology, okay, as a moralized view, which is, as opposed to other ideologies, it's a thin-centered ideology that it doesn't give you all the answers, but it can attach to other ideologies like nativism, socialism, connecting. So it's kind of connecting to other ideologies. And what characterizes populism is this combination of dichotomous view of the people versus the elite. So there is the elite that is characterized as self-serving and conspiring against the will of the people. The people are seen as a homogeneous group, okay? The pure people versus the evil and corrupt elite. It has a Manichaean outlook, a dichotomy between these two. So tend to see the political world as good and bad, not as a compromise. So this is as opposed to a kind of pluralist view of politics. So it's an anti-pluralist, anti-elitist ideology, and also it has a normative component of support for popular sovereignty. So people should be the one making the final decisions.
You see why Thatcher and Reagan are not populist.
Yeah, they may be. Yeah, so they are
strong ideology. But
at least that's yeah. If you go to Kasmude, which is one of the main political science scholars, Mude would tell you that they are not. But I should also say that populism is a controversial concept in political science. There are a lot of debates, and while there is some agreement, there is not a full consensus on the thing. And also, the idea is that because there is a populist ideology, people may differ. People may differ in their populist attitudes. So some people would have stronger populist attitudes, others would have weaker populist attitudes. And these attitudes this is an individual level predisposition. So this is something that we use to interpret the world. And populist actors, politicians, they activate these predispositions. And their messages would be more appealing to people with stronger populist attitudes. Okay? Okay, so turning to bureaucrats, why populism can change stereotypes? Because bureaucrats can be seen as part of the self-serving, conspiring elite that obstructs the will of the people. And that is something that you can see among different populists, and actually also for populists from the right and also from the left. Here you can see examples for populists from the right, how they use this idea. So the deep state narrative, that would be probably the most prominent example of this. So in as much as bureaucrats are part of the deep state, that is to say that bureaucrats are part of this group of elite that is acting to advance their own interests at the expense of the people. Also, I mean, if you look at the narratives of Trump, he's talking about to drain the swamp. The way he is referring to bureaucrats, to the bureaucrats in Washington. That is something that is common to many populist leaders. And if you think about it, bureaucrats are an easy target for this worldview, because there's something about bureaucracy that is by nature complex, opaque, hard to understand. Think about government ministries, right? It's something that is very, very hard to understand. So it's natural for people with populist ideology to think about bureaucrats as conspiring, as the deep state. That's an easy target. And bureaucrats, for them, it's pretty hard to defend themselves.
Let's go to the Q&A.
Okay, so what we're talking about here is basically a shift from a criticism on performance, which was the previous stereotype, to a criticism on morality. So we're turning from a low competence stereotype to low warmth stereotype. The stereotype, so that's the main point, the stereotype depicted by this populist narrative of the bureaucracy might be different. It's not about how they perform, it is about do they perform in good faith. Okay, and to complete, so the last bit of it is that we also expect that the political context might matter. And it would matter if populists are in government or whether they are in opposition. Because something important tends to happen when populists come to power, which is what we see in the US and in Israel and other places. What many populists in power do is that they shift their anti-elitist targets. So when they're in the opposition, populists tend to target politicians. Politicians are the elite. Politicians are serving the elite. When they come to power, these anti-elitist sentiment doesn't fade away. They turn it into the non-elected groups. So now the elites are the judiciary, the media, the academia, and the bureaucracy. This is a pattern that you can see across different countries. So we're talking about the delegitimization of bureaucracy, which is part of repertoire of democratic backsliding. This is serving democratic backsliding. It helps populist leaders to weaken checks and balances on them. But also importantly, when they do so when Netanyahu is targeting the bureaucrats, when he's talking about the deep state, when Trump is talking about the enemy from within, this is also becoming a partisan message. So it's not only a narrative, it's a partisan narrative, which is going, by nature, it's going to be more appealing for partisans than for non-partisans.
But it's also
so
that's for representation.
Yeah.
It has a opposite effect on the other part.
I'm not assuming this, but I can see why you can make such an hypothesis. We didn't make such an hypothesis, but I don't know. Could be. We didn't collect the data yet, so it could be. I can think about why it happens. But so overall, the assumption, the hypotheses are that overall citizens with higher levels of populist attitudes, populist attitudes can be either on the right or on the left. Both leftists can be populists and right-wing people can be populists. And actually, in Israel, in the data, it's balanced. You can see all shades of populists. So people with higher levels of populist attitudes overall will hold more negative stereotypes of public sector employees, and specifically on the warmth, morality dimension. Okay, so not only more negative stereotypes, but also different in the content. Okay, and also in cases where populists are in power, for example in Israel, we would expect that these effects are going to be stronger among government supporters. So in Israel, I tried to kind of make it, so if you divide it in a matrix of, populist, weak or strong populists, opposition supporter, non-supporter, I'm expecting it to be the most prominent among if you're both a government supporter and strong populist attitudes. That would be the group where we would expect the greater shift in populist attitudes, in stereotypes. That is where we would expect to find negative moral stereotypes as opposed to negative competence. How many minutes do I have left? 10. Okay. So let's talk a bit about the empirical design. I guess most of you are not empirical scholars. Some of you are.
Not all of us are.
I'm going to okay. Okay. So if there's something I need to clarify, or if it's just tell me. Okay. So the project is, so we're planning. There's the Israeli study, which I told you we're conducting now, and there's another study which we are planning later this year in Austria. And we think that this comparison is valuable because in Israel we have a populist government, a very prominent case of a populist government since 2023, okay, headed by the Likud party, which is now can be characterized as a populist party. And whereas in Austria we now have a situation of populists in the opposition. Okay, so there's also a key right-wing populist party in Austria, but now it's in the opposition. So we've done 2 pilot studies in June and August 2025, and now we're doing the actual field work. We also use pre-registration, which is a procedure we register the hypothesis ahead. So to kind of tie our hands, not to play too much with that. And we're planning a 2-wave study. So now we're doing the wave 1, and second wave would be in a couple of weeks. So I'm going to talk only about the Israeli study. Okay, I'll talk about the design, and then I'll give you some illustrative results from the pilot, not from the real data, but from the pilot. So you need to take everything with a grain of salt. Okay, everything is very tentative. So the idea that our idea is a 2-wave panel survey study. So it's a survey, online survey. The first wave includes questions on populist attitudes and control. That would be our explanatory variable or our independent variable. And the second wave, in a couple of weeks, it would include question on the outcome variable, the stereotypes. Why we use this distinction? Why we use a two-wave? Because that is a way to prevent what is called common method bias. When you ask people about 2 variables in the same survey, you are likely to get a correlation between them just by the fact that people answered at the same time. So if you divide them, that is slightly strengthening our causal argument. Okay. It's still a correlational study, so any causal claim we're making it can't be too robust, but it helps to address some concerns. So it's better than nothing. Okay, so the first wave, we have questions on populist attitudes. We are using a scale that asks people about the different dimensions of populism. It's a scale, items which we adjusted from other scales used in other EU countries. So you have questions on belief in popular sovereignty. So for example, the people should be asked whenever important decisions are taken. Then we have 4 questions on anti-elitism. And here it was important for us to ask people generally about the elite. Because previous surveys tended to ask people specifically about politicians, which is very, very bad because it doesn't capture what happened when populists are in power. So instead of asking about politicians, we ask people about elites in general. So for example, we ask people the following sentence, ordinary people are prevented from improving their lives by the actions of unaccountable elites.
Is it you created the scale?
So we took a validated scale from previous works, but we had to slightly changed some of the items, both to adjust it to the Israeli context and also to account for this. I mean, the last thing was important for us, that we want to ask people not about politicians, but about elites. So people can answer about elites in general. But we also validated this data. So we conducted factor analysis to check the reliability of the scale. Then you have question about homogeneity. Do people perceive the people as ordinary people all put together? They are all of good character. And questions on Manichaean outlook. So politics is a struggle between the people and those in power, good and evil. This is how this variable looks like in our pilot study. So first you can see quite a big variation. And more, if you can see that it's a bit above the midpoint. So most people, according to this scale, so most people tend to agree with at least some of these items. Okay, most people, you can say most people are to some degree populists. It happens in the best families. Okay. And interestingly, there are no differences between pro-Netanyahu and anti-Netanyahu supporters. Okay, so you have here and there populists. Still, you do see some differences across parties in kind of the way you would expect. So the party that, on average, their supporters get the highest scores is Otzma Yehudit, which makes sense. That would be the most prominent case in Israel of a right-wing populist party. And the party with the lowest scores, well, you have, okay, the state camp, you have very, very few people voting for yeah, but then you have the lowest scores, the Democratic, the Liberal Party, which also makes sense. The differences are quite small, but still, it gives you some evidence about the validity of the scale, but it's not just random numbers. We also, to test the validity of the scales, we use the content validity. So you want to see that it correlates with other factors that you would assume it correlates with. So the literature tells us that populist attitudes are associated with believing conspiracy theory. That's a strong claim. And we asked people about two conspiracy theories. One which is apolitical, that vaccines are the dangers of vaccines they are known by the pharma companies, and populist attitudes in both camps. So in both parties, people with stronger populist attitudes are more likely to believe in this conspiracy theory. The other conspiracy theory is the deep state theory, which is now very, very popular in Israel. I think 50% of the people tend to say that deep state exists. And here you can see what we call interaction effect. So in both sides, people who are more populist are more likely to agree with the deep state, but it's stronger among coalition supporters. Why? We think that it's because of the explanation that we gave, that if you're a supporter of Netanyahu government, you are more receptive. You are more likely to accept this kind of message that comes from Netanyahu. Okay, so we don't see the opposite effect here, which you could have expected, but we don't see it here, at least not for the deep state. Okay, there is a similar, more or less correlation when we ask them about trust in the civil service. So here again, those who are both supporters of the Netanyahu government and people with high populist attitudes tend to say that they distrust the civil service. So Steve, they give us a clue that we're in about the hypothesis. Still, these are explicit questions. Okay, so here we explicitly ask people, do you agree or disagree? Because now we're moving to stereotypes, and here our measures are less explicit. We want people to say naturally what they think without explicitly asking them, do you trust, do you distrust? And then we code the answers. So here you can see the task that we give them. It's the same one that we gave in the previous study that I showed you. It's Hebrew, so I'm going to translate it. So it says, in this part, we're going to show you names of different groups of employees, And for each group, we would like you to state spontaneously characters, traits that comes to your mind, and please write up to 6 for every group. And then we ask them about public civil servants using different labels, either public service employees, which is more neutral, or clerks or bureaucrats, which is more negative. So they are giving their short answers, and then later we ask them about each one, is it positive or negative? So they tell us if it's positive or negative. And we also code them to the dimensions. So it's either a warmth, morality, sociability, or a competence trait. Is it about ability, about performance, about assertiveness? This is from the pilot. I'm good. Okay, these are just the keywords. It's very, very similar to the ones that we found back there, just to illustrate how it would look like. They give all sorts of answers, and then we code them to negative versus positive and to the different dimensions. Also, when we compare the different labels, we can see that public service employees are a bit more positive than the others. Okay. So these are results from the second pilot, which we have conducted in August. And what you see here is a tentative support for our hypothesis, this interaction effect, which means that we find a negative correlation between populist attitudes and stereotypes, which is more pronounced for the government supporters. So we see this effect among Netanyahu supporters of Netanyahu coalition. Here, actually, we see an opposite effect for the other group, but I can't say this is robust enough, and also it's only a pilot. And also, when we only filter, when we only look at responses that are about morality, that's our main argument, that it's not only negative, it's negative specifically on morality, we see the same thing. So people were supporters of the coalition with high populist attitudes are more likely to describe civil servants, bureaucrats, clerks using negative moral terms such as corrupt or these kind of words. Okay, does populism alter public service stereotypes? Maybe. Okay, tentative findings, we're going to look. In terms of the implications, so I would be curious to see what you think about this, but it's not a normative paper, but there could be normative implications to what I'm saying, because it means that that would undermine people's legitimacy and trust, and eventually their compliance and their collaboration with the authorities.
Thank you very much, Saar. Michal, if remote participants want to ask or comment, please take the chat. The floor is open. Yali.
Yeah, so thanks. This is fascinating, and I have so many questions. I'll just ask a couple. The first one is basically, should we be surprised? So what is the puzzle here? In the sense, I can imagine that maybe it's about how startups are being built, how resistant they are, but if you would ask me, what do you think that, Likud supporters think about bureaucrats? I would say they're not, extremely supportive of them. So this is one. But the second is that I think that there's a big difference between the type of bureaucrats that we're dealing with when it comes to stereotypes and to populist notions. If we think about the stereotypes, I would call it the person in the counter, right? So you go to, the tax authority, there's someone sitting there, a simple person, you interact with them.
In the administration, we tend to call them. we tend to call them street-level bureaucrats.
Street-level bureaucrats.
Yeah.
When it comes to populist notions, these are Supreme Court justices, the military judge advocate, right, and so on. So, and these are not people that, if you would look at stereotypes, no one thinks that Supreme Court justices are lazy, they don't work. Everyone knows they work, but we wish that they would not work so much, right? So it's a very different notion. And I wonder how can you capture it in this, and then maybe it comes to my third and last question for now, which is, when do you ask the questions about the deep state and everything? Is it before or after? Because it seems to me that these are so closely related issues that there might be some influence that makes the right influence the answers. And listen, maybe if you have two waves, change it between the waves to see if there's a difference. And maybe just one last thing. I think that there's I'm not sure how you capture the difference between the one in government and the I would think that even if the Likud was not in power right now, you would find similar results among Likud supporters, because specifically in Israel, the attitudes towards these type of bureaucrats were there even when they were in the opposition. So there are so many other factors that you should factor in, such as who are the current justices in the Supreme Court of the state? It's like the US, that now they're more conservative. So there are many factors that you need to put in. And when you look at Austria, so I wonder how these interactions work.
Do you want me to go for? I think one by one. I think maybe better. Sure. Okay. Thank you. These are really good questions. And Michal, if you want to provide another to complete me or something, then just raise your hand. But I tend to think about it that I think the first two questions are actually related. And the way I see it, what would be surprising is if we found that the narrative about bureaucrats trickles down to stereotypes of simple bureaucrats. Because we ask people in the end about public service employees. We ask them about עובדים בשירות הציבורי. And we also ask them, who are these people? Give us examples. And they give examples of, mostly they talk about street-level bureaucrats. So if we see that these kind of stereotypes of vicious, evil, low morality stereotypes, they are also affecting the stereotypes of civil servants, I think that would be surprising, and that would tell us that this is something serious that is happening. That it's not only superficial belief; it's something that is penetrating the DNA of the operating system of citizen-government relations. Whether that is the case or not, I don't know. We will see based on the data. When did we ask about the deep state? Yeah, sure. That's exactly the problem of asking one next to the other. So now in the real study, we're asking about conspiracy theory in the first wave, and stereotypes are going to be in the second wave. So that would be interesting to see if we find these differences. But we did ask
but the populist scale, where is it?
Yeah, it's also it's in the same wave, but there are questions separating between them. But actually, the assumption of relations between populist attitudes and belief in conspiracy theory, that's pretty established. So there are good studies by Omer Yair and...
No, I meant you have the part of the stereotypes,
yeah,
and the part where you have populist scales, including approaches towards elites.
Yeah, these would be in two separate waves.
Oh, okay.
That's the important distinction. So first wave, populism, the second wave would be about Serbia.
Okay.
That's really important because we want to prevent a priming effect. Okay. That's what we're talking about. And about the context, yeah, I mean, we agree that the context is more complicated than what, and this is also why I think we need to be more cautious about claiming that we are isolating differences in context. There might be other differences between Israel and Austria and the US, and so I will be a bit more cautious. So we're doing a study in Israel, and we're planning to do other studies in EU. And if we will find differences, this is something that we can discuss. But I don't think we're going to be in a position where we can make strong claims about what actually drives these differences. They might be due to this, but we need to be a bit more cautious about it. That the context is different.
Nadim, you are muted.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks, Saar. I have, I think, two questions. One is that Israel, I think, is characterized by the prominence of right-wing substantive populism. That means that it's not just the populist story, it's also right-wing ideology populism. And as opposed to the United States, for example, Israel is not characterized with the prominence of left socioeconomic wing populism. So the first question is that I wanted to know whether were you considering to ask people, and most particularly kind of this Likud and Otzma Yehudit people, maybe to expose them to kind of the Bernie Sanders populism, and then to ask them what do they feel about the civil servants? Because I could speculate that there is kind of willingness to interact with the state in Israel when it perceived as a provider of social services and so on and so forth. So the question is that element of Israeli populist politics affects something to your idea, or are you aware of research that expose people to left-wing populism and then get different result about stereotype of the public sector? So this is the first question. The other one is that in the relationship between elites and voters in democratic backsliding dynamics, there's a question of who are the engine for radicalization. So you can think about, in some kind of abstraction, you can think about a situation in which elites are inciting against the deep state, and that causes the voters to be inside. But you can also think about a reverse mechanism in which it's not a top-down mechanism, but it's a bottom-up. So I wonder. I just wondered if your empirical work can say something about that in the context of how voters perceive the deep state or the civil service or something like that, or that causality in that sense is not something that you thought about. So those are, and thank you.
Thanks, Nadim.
I think I'll give a short answer. The question about right-wing, left-wing populism, that's a legitimate concern. We're dealing mostly here with right-wing populism, and in the context of Israel, while we do see that there are left voters who are populists, there is not a strong left-wing populist party in Israel as opposed to other countries. That could be, I think that would be a follow-up study and something that we cannot fully capture this. but it would be interesting to see. And for the second question, I can only say that we also ask people in the survey about who do you think are the elites. We also ask them an open question, and we also ask them to specify different groups. That is something that we're planning to do as exploratory aspect. And we'll see. I'm not sure that we would be able to provide a very strong answer to this, but we'll see. Does that answer your question? Or but when you meant bottom up, did you mean something like that the Yoamashit is the Attorney General is the evil agent and she is using
No. I meant how does radical perception evolves.
Oh.
And you can think about two basic chronologies. The first is that Itamar Ben-Gvir is accelerating the level of incitement, and that is something that causes his voters to be more radical. Mm-hmm. But you can think of an opposite process in which Itamar Ben-Gvir's voters are extremely radical, and he is affected by that and needs to radicalize his political positions.
About demand side of populism versus
exactly. So, for example, in Israel, Noam Gidron writes that our backsliding process is bottom up, which means that our elites are more intensive in causing the incitement and the radicalizations. But let's say in Latin American countries, it's not always like that. Let's say in Chile, people are more left-wing radicalized than their political elites. And my question was only if you think about those causal processes when you assume that there's a populist attitude and that it will affect the perception of the public service, because the assumption that there is a given populist attitude is not that established. I think that now I phrased it properly.
I think it's something that we assume tacitly, and we could be criticized for it, as you are doing, and that's a legitimate criticism. And I don't know, I need to think about it. Michal, do you have another comment? Or
I think you could say it's a discursive process that we're seeing. This is why we chose to look at stereotypes. As Sal said, it's something that evolves over time, but it still takes time, and it reflects something that is happening in the way we perceive different public organizations. And so when you're saying bottom up, I think that we're going somewhere in the way we perceive different organizations. So I think that the spontaneous way that we were checking it is kind of a natural reflection of what people automatically think about. And we're seeing change. We're seeing a difference. And we're seeing populism on both sides. And there's something that someone said over there before about the ranking of different public bureaucrats, whether they're on the counter or street level bureaucrats or officials. But we're thinking that something here in the interplay is important for articulating how citizens perceive their relationship with the state, with different organizations within.
Let me take this over. First of all, I don't think your research question is correct, because your research question is how populism transform our stereotype about bureaucracy. You don't actually measure the transformation.
Right.
You measure populist versus non-populist, and it would be very interesting to examine transformation, and this will require you to measure the level of populism in society, and over time to see, how people reaction changes. So you're talking not about transformation, but about whether populism stereotypes about bureaucracy are different from non-populism.
Right.
Okay, so and here there are two very important issues. First,
right.
what
you got me. I was just trying to be more provocative for the presentation. You absolutely.
Now, what are bureaucrats? We talked about it already. And first of all, different cultures use different terms which already embodies some kind of judgment. In England, you say civil servants, and it's a very different meaning from pkidim. And pkidim in the 50s in Israel was viewed very positively. The pkidim were mechubadim, because this was the tradition of Austrian or Germanic system in which bureaucracy is very important. So the stereotypes of bureaucracy are on the on the origin very different from culture to culture. Second, as was said here, when we people talk in terms of bureaucracy or pkidim, they don't refer to the elites. They refer to the low-level pkidim. And if you ask about ovdei tzibur, it's also doctors. Doctors in hospitals are ovdei tzibur. So I think you have to refine much more narrowly what you refer by bureaucracy, or different kinds of bureaucracy, or different kinds of civil services. And once you want to compare Austria and Israel, this will be very important. The third point, which relates to also what was said here, left-wing populism in the West was never in power. Okay? And Noam Gidron and others, maybe not Noam Gidron, wrote about it, that South American populism, when populism comes to rule, is a very different type of populism, and I'm not sure if you'll find their contempt or bad stereotypes about bureaucracy, because it's exactly the opposite of the populist ideal of the state from the right-wing populism. So it will be interesting, really, not to take another example from a place in which populism has, is in government, like some of the South American states, and see if the results will be different. I have many others, but I'll stop here.
No, just if I understand your question is it a left-right issue or in government or in opposition issue?
Right.
So you have to control for it when you examine.
If this is okay, I would prefer just to collect a bit more questions but just about the last one, I think now we have an interesting case in New York, which is Zoran Mamdani. He's a very, very prominent example of left-wing populists, and you can see interesting things happening there. Also, he's treating the civil servants in a very, very positive way. So it could be that our story is only about right-wing populism. We haven't decided yet.
Benny.
Yes, very interesting talk. And I was just thinking about what can we think of it normatively, what can we extract from it, and also Nadiv's point about is it top down or bottom up, and I was also thinking of whether do the populist elites, the politicians, do they take the meaning term and the stereotypes against bureaucrats and just use it like it's a good target because anyway they're seen down, or they just create a whole new stereotype against them. Like I would think, let's say, the regular street level bureaucrats, they anyway are seen very not positive, so they just use it against them. Or, but let's say, I'm not sure before the right-wing populists were like judges weren't seen as negative then. Or maybe not, I'm not sure, but like, and the thing is, why do I ask these questions? The question, what do the normative, when we think about politicians, they have some kind of maybe responsibility, or we can claim that normatively they should act X and they do Y, until we can think of, let's say, what do they do? And do they accelerate these radical ideas, or they just reflect what people say? I mean, so we can think about what they should do, because they do something. They have a part in this process, and it also relates to. I mean, and when we think about if we're trying to think about if normatively what they should do, we should also think, okay, some of these stereotypes. There's some grain of criticism, which are genuine criticism. So how do we, let's say, if you think of what they should do, how do we differentiate and distinguish between the positive, constructive criticism and the stereotype of criticism, which is not so good? So that's normative thoughts.
Maybe just one more point. I think that Ellie's question made me think that maybe the notion of the change that you've made to the scale of unelected elites is a bit problematic, because we might think about bureaucrats, but unelected elites depends on your type of populist. Might be the rich, might be Zionists, I don't know, like Jews, yeah, or whatever. Right? And the results are very, very different. So even if you find differences between, I would say, left and right, it doesn't mean that the populist notion and your assumption is exactly the same. So maybe you should think about something more concrete in this regard. And also about the question that was made earlier about subcategories, and you said that stereotype is something general, but we do have stereotypes of cops, right? Or of doctors. So we do have stereotypes also for subcategories.
Lawyers.
And I wonder in this regard, because I think that the way that the populist notion works is attacking, you see that the government attacks different sectors at different times. So if it might be the police that are going after him, but then now he's on trial, so the police is not relevant anymore, and it's controlled by Ben-Gvir, so the police are the good guys, but now the judges are the bad guys, right? Or so in this sense, and if we think about the US, for example, so ICE, are they the good guys or the bad guys in terms of populist notions?
Are there bureaucrats?
The public servants. And so I do think that, the general term bureaucrat might capture something, but you should really consider looking at stereotypes of specific examples, maybe not this open question, but the other type of empirical research where you just have the qualities and divide it into different sectors. And then you hypothesize that the specific sectors that are being attacked by the government will be perceived in a certain way, while other sectors might be perceived differently.
I'll add to Yali's point another, I think, axis which might be interesting for you to investigate. We distinguish between rules and standards, cultures of rules, cultures of standards. And this is very
in Hebrew. That would be
standardi.
Okay. Klalim would be the more general.
No, the opposite. So Klalim, you cannot drive over 90 miles per hour. Okay. The standard, you need to act reasonably.
Okay. Drivers. But we distinguish legal cultures or legal systems according to legal system based on rules, mainly the continental and legal cultures that are based on standards like the Anglo-American.
Like Rashlanut.
Yeah. Okay. This is very important in terms of bureaucracy, because a bureaucracy in a rule-governed culture is really doing only, checking the rules and applying them. In Holland, okay, or in Austria, it's a rules-based society, and bureaucrats, say, I understand that you have a very, very unique problem. I sympathize you, but I'm sorry, according to the rules.
We would call this legalistic tradition.
Okay. In Anglo-American, including Israel, it's the bureaucracy who has discretion. Okay, this reasonableness comes from basically the fact that, and bureaucrats are, even on low level, have much more power or discretion or jurisdiction to decide, it's a unique case, so I'm going outside of the rules. And it's possible to hypothesize the attitudes toward bureaucrats will also be affected by the type of legal cultures or bureaucratic cultures from these two types, which is, the two types definition might not be exhaustive or sufficient.
Adi.
Thank you. So just a short question. I think I'm following, piggybacking on what Yali just said. So do you distinguish between public service and public servants? Like, is there a difference there? Because I remember very clearly I was working for the Attorney General a couple of years back, and David Anoch wrote a very I don't know how to describe it, but he was very, very adamant about how people should not be serving, specifically the Attorney General or public service generally. So, and I don't, it's a question of maybe not so much public servants and public service, and whether there's a difference between the two. Does that make sense? I'll reframe what I'm saying. It makes sense? Okay. Which I just want to say affects people, even though they don't think that the public servants in themselves are bad or whatever it is. Public service in itself is bad, which therefore affects maybe the perception of people who participate in public service thereafter. And I would assume that we would all agree that David Anoch is not a populist, a left or right populist, but then, or not agree, whatever. David Anoch, this is an example, of sentiment.
He's one of our most frequent listeners on YouTube.
Analytically, you could distinguish between stereotypes of civil servants and stereotypes of the public sector, let's say. And there's a kind of a theoretical assumption that the two are strongly linked, but I think we have some evidence showing that they are actually not that strongly linked as one would think about. And our own data shows that people have more negative stereotypes toward organizations than toward employees. In this study, we decided to ask only about stereotypes of public sector employees. Why? Because most of the literature discusses this, so it's kind of a strategic decision. But we also asked about trust in the civil service, which should be a strong enough proxy for stereotypes of public sector organizations. So I think I would expect to find a similar effect for trust in the civil service, but
But I'm sorry, I just want to push back a little bit, because in terms of causation, then you have a problem, because it would make sense that once you have a populist government, you would have non-populist opinions that would push against being a part of the public service. And then if you see bad notions regarding public service, it cannot necessarily be attributed to populist notions. It can also be attributed to anti-populist notions that are trying to make people not be complicit in the populist government. And therefore, the causation and attribution element could just be something you need to take into account.
Yeah, but then let's see if I'm getting it right. But then the proper test would be to compare within government supporters. Within government supporters, the question would be, are people that are stronger populists
correct? Yes.
More likely to internalize negative messages about bureaucracy?
Yes. Yes.
And I think that's the main question that we're tackling here. So even within government supporters, other data shows, as you can assume, you have people who are more or less populist. Also, by the way, within government, you have more or less populist parties. You have Otzma Yehudit, and you have Tzionut Datit, which is far less populist.
Yeah,
I think so.
I'm trying to understand, what is the mechanism that links together populist views, or attitudes, stereotypes about public servants, and the effects, let's say, decline in trust, for example. How would you sketch it, if you could?
I think you're asking whether stereotypes shape trust, or does trust shape stereotypes?
I'm trying to imagine it. What it looks like. What's the?
I think the causal effect, the causal effects here are probably complicated in two ways. So, I mean, our model suggests that populism shapes both perceptions. So populism would shape trust, and it would. We don't have hypotheses about trust, right? That's just another thing we're testing. Our main hypotheses are about stereotypes, but we assume that populism shapes stereotypes, and also populism shapes trust. Now, what's the relation between trust and stereotypes? Probably it's both ways, like most social science phenomena. It's probably stereotypes may affect trust, and on the other hand, trust may affect stereotypes. That can go in both directions.
Or in the opposite direction. No, it's interesting because it could be, you can check this hypothesis in the future, that what populism means is that you change your stereotype, but you don't necessarily change your trust. When you need the doctor, okay, you trust him. And the populist effect is the gap between the actual trust and the sabatam.
Yeah, I mean, these are very interesting causality questions. The problem for us as researchers is that depicting causal effects is very, very challenging. Our main tool for depicting causal effect is to use experiments. So at the early stages of this project, for example, we were thinking about maybe we can prime people's populist attitudes, like artificially manipulate them to be more populist. And I mean, I think it was a nice thought, but it's actually it's quite challenging to do it in an experimental setting.
It could
if you do it in a subtle way, but even if you do, it's quite difficult to change people's established perception.
But when you see these, for example, the warrants, right, the warrants attitudes or words decline, do you see kind of a rise in the competence levels? The understanding of competence, because if someone's a benevolent bureaucrat, but they're very competent at being evil.
I think I have the same intuition as you're suggesting. Yeah. So the intuition is that the populist narrative is high competence, right? Because they are sophisticated, evil. Yeah. Eventually we didn't when you do a pre-registration, you need to write down the hypothesis that you're really, really certain about. And we weren't that certain about this. but I wouldn't be surprised to find it. I mean, it would make sense theoretically.
Yeah.
It should be like if you were writing a philosophy paper, you would assume this. But as anyone dealing with data knows, the data is far more noisy, complicated, messy, and
I want to show. It's also a short follow-up from what Ellie said about legal culture of war culture or stand culture. So your equivalency of like grouping together the stereotypes of bureaucratic elites and lay and street level bureaucrats, grouping them together is like it's very relevant in Israeli legal culture, which is a discretionary standard base. Because what we have the standard base where especially high-level bureaucrats, but also all the board, but they have very wide discretion. And the populist parties say we don't want them to be. We want them to be kidding. We want them to be without any discretion. They should just follow what they say. Yes, and that's why I think it's like it should, in a way, could be different in, let's say, European jurisdictions.
But here's my question to you. Do you think that when Israeli populist politicians speak about clerks, about kidding, do you think they only think about high-level bureaucrats in Salah ad-Din, or do they also think about lower level?
No, what they're doing is they're taking the justices or the high-level bureaucrats and they downgrading them to the street level, saying they should only follow the rules and that's it. They shouldn't.
The lowest echelons are Na'arei Ha'otzar. Beyond that, they are not.
So for them, Na'arei Ha'otzar, the professionals in the treasury, are they part of the deep state?
Well, depends. Do they listen to them or not?
Interns,
exactly.
So interns in the Ministry of Justice, are they part of the deep state?
Definitely.
Definitely.
The sons and grandsons, this is how they perceive by the
But not the interns in the hospital.
But not the interns.
Although they came from the same elites, basically.
The doctors who are not part of the deep state. It's a narrative thing.
Unless they are Chagai Levin, politicized.
Thank you very much, Saar.